The multi-user editor in Unreal allows for live collaboration using a client-server relationship. One person sets up the server or host and then creates a session. In this session, multiple users or clients can connect to it, and each user can work together on the same project at the same time. It allows for real-time synchronization of all changes. So assets are synchronized across all connected users via a lightweight, transaction-based sync system. So rather than sending all the actual assets back and forth, it instead uses this message or transaction that contains the information about what changed. Then the clients use that transaction information to essentially duplicate the change on their local machine. Now, all of these changes that are occurring on everyone's machines are actually kept essentially in a virtual sandbox. And it isn't until the users persist those changes or save those changes that all of those changes will then be copied to their local copy of the project on their machine. Multi-user editing is designed to complement source control. Generally, everyone will be using Perforce or Git or some other version control system, and then everyone will get the latest revision or change list. Though you don't actually have to use source control to use multi-user editing, it is a recommended practice. From here, everyone can collaborate on the project, and once all the changes for the day have been made, the host can then push those changes back to Perforce after ending the session. Multi-user editing supports multiple platforms while collaborating as well. So while the host might be working on a Windows PC in the editor, another user can be in VR mode or even using the virtual scouting tools, which we'll look at later in the webinar. And other users could be connected from Mac OS X devices or even an iPad Pro using the Unreal Virtual Camera system. As Daryl and I begin to work today, you're going to see that we're present in the level via avatars. So we'll be able to see what each other is doing and where we are in the level. When collaborating, there will probably be times when two clients try to work on the same object, and this is where the multi-user system's conflict avoidance mechanisms come into play. Any actors that are being moved, rotated, or scaled in the viewport will temporarily be locked by the client making the changes, so other users won't be able to modify that actor until the current owner stops interacting with it. Assets such as materials will be locked by the editing user until they save the asset. And finally, assets in the content browser can actually be locked manually by right-clicking on the object. The system works over Local Area Network or VPN. Daryl and I will be collaborating over VPN today. But before we get started and begin to work collaboratively on a project, there are some prerequisites that need to be met. First of all the machines, including clients and host, must be running the project on the same engine build version. And all machines must also be on the same LAN or VPN. The project name must be the same across all machines, and the starting state of the content must be exactly the same. Typically, this is handled by everyone syncing to the same change list or revision from source control. Keep in mind that if you connect to a session in which changes have already been made by other clients, the server will automatically send you those changes so that you can get caught up to everyone else. Okay, let's jump over to our Unreal project and walk through the steps needed to get us all set up, and then we'll look at how to start a server and create a session. In our project, the first step we need to take is to enable the multi-user editing plugin, and we'll find this plugin under Settings, Plugins. From here, just search for multi-user, or you can find the plugin in the Developer section. Enabling the plugin is going to require a project restart. So after restarting, we now need to modify the client settings found under Project Settings. In the Project Settings window, we need to scroll down to Plugins, and then we can select Multi-User Editing. I'm going to enable the Multi-User Browser Toolbar button. This is going to require a restart as well, but before we do, I'm also going to specify my avatar display name, and then I'm going to set the avatar color to green. This way, it'll be easy to identify me by my avatar. Now, if you don't want to add the toolbar button, you can instead find the Multi-User Browser under Windows, and then Developer Tools. Once all of this is set up, we also need to set up our UDP messaging, again found under Plugins in the project settings here. This step will ensure that computers can all communicate with each other. The first thing we need here is our own IP address, and this is going to go into the unicast endpoint field. Now you may be able to leave this field at the default value of 0.0.0.0, but if that doesn't work, you can grab your current IP from the Windows command prompt. In the command prompt, we'll type ipconfig Then look for the IPv4 address. Now I'll simply copy this address and then paste it into the field. Be sure to add a colon at the end of the address and put 0 for the port number. From here, I'm going to open the advanced options and add an array element to static endpoints. In this field, I'll be adding Daryl's IP address. At the end of his address, though, I also need to add a colon and then the port number here, which is 6666. After restarting again, I now have the Browse button on my toolbar to the right, and this opens the multi-user browser. If there were any other servers currently running on the VPN, their sessions would be displayed here. I'm going to launch a new server now. And this will bring up the server process window. Be sure to leave this running in the background to keep the server running while you work. Now going back to the browser, you can see I have a previous session that I've already created. Now I could double click this session to join it, but I know that the session is invalid to my current project. So instead I'm going to go ahead and just right click on it and remove it by selecting delete. You could also use the trash can icon at the top. If you don't delete a session, you can always come back to it and pick up where you left off in that session. However, it's best to create a new one for each new collaborative period on the project. Something to keep in mind is that the server stores the history of changes made during a given session as long as that session still exists. Now, when a user disconnects from a session without saving the changes they've made or persisting those changes, their local project will revert back to the original state and hot reload any changed assets. Now, this doesn't mean the changes they made are lost, because remember, those changes are stored in the session on the server. So the user can always reconnect to the session, and when they do, the server will then reapply all those changes. So let's create a new session now, and we'll name it. All right, and once the session is live, you can see that I've automatically been added to the list of clients. To leave a session, I can simply click on the Leave Session button. The session is actually still available to the other clients even though I'm not in it, and those users can continue to work and make changes. To rejoin the session, I simply need to double-click it. All right, so now that we know how to create a server and join and leave a session, let's turn it over to Daryl now, and he can walk you through the client setup and connection to the session on his end.
All right, so here I am in Unreal, and I want to join that session that Matt set up on the server. So all I have to do is go click on the Browse button, and you'll see that it's immediately going to start looking for a server to join. Now, because we're on different networks over VPN, I need to provide it with a little bit more information, and this is easily done by clicking the tool icon in the upper right-hand corner. So we'll go ahead and bring that up, and I'll specify a name for myself. And then I'll also need to provide this with a couple of IPs. So to do that, we'll go down to the UDP messaging, which is kind of toward the bottom. And the first one I need to set up is the unicast endpoint, which is going to be my IP. So I'll just go ahead and paste in my IP, and then you need to have a colon and a 0 after that. And then the next IP that I need to provide is the static endpoint, and this is going to be Matt's IP. So I'll just click the plus icon and enter in Matt's IP. So I know it starts with 10, but Matt, where do I go from there?
Yeah, so it's going to be 10.192.
Okay.
.68.
Got it.
.153. And then colon 6666.
All right, so on port 666. Got it. So once that's done, you'll see that it's already found Matt's session. So just like that, we've gone ahead and we found a session. So to join this, it's a really simple process of either highlighting the session you want to join and clicking the join button, and I can see that Matt's already in there, or I can just double click on it to join it. So with that done, we are now both in the session. You can see both of our names are displayed, and there's been no changes to the history. So Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, so we're basically ready to start working now. But before we do, I just want to call out some of these options here in the multi-user browser. I can actually teleport to you and then toggle your visibility. But right now, I'm not in game mode, so I can't see anything. I can't see you. So I need to press G on the keyboard to go to game mode. And now I can actually see your avatar. You're present now in the level with me. You should be able to see me too, right?
Yeah, if I go ahead and hit G, there you are. We're actually not looking at each other. I'm checking you out, and I see your line of sight and what type of device you're on. I get a nice little icon representing that you're on a desktop device there. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, so I can actually, in the multi-user browser here, under Presence, next to your name, I can click on this eyeball icon, and that hides you, so I no longer see you. So if I feel like,
Okay,
the other users are getting in the way while I'm trying to work, I can simply toggle them on and off. I can also teleport to
excellent.
you. Using this little map icon, if I click that, that takes me to your position.
Oh, sweet. So I've gone ahead and actually docked my multi-user browser window up there by my World Outliner just because I figured I might want to, see what's going on and be able to use those features. So that's great.
So now that we're ready to begin working in our project, let's look at some of the techniques that we'll use to be able to work together, to collaborate. So Daryl, why don't you do something in the level, and we'll talk about what's going to happen as far as like whether or not I can modify that asset. So we'll talk about the conflict system inside of the multi-user editing tool. We'll also talk about the transaction history and persistence.
All right, sure. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of grab this tree. And when I grab that tree, I'm going to hit the browse button just to kind of move over to it. And as I start to move this guy around, right now I'm basically changing this. And you should probably be seeing that change in Matt's view also. And if I want to, I can right click on top of this tree and I can go to the multi-user setting and I can lock this asset. And the reason I might want to lock an asset is, I want to be the one who's in control of making the change to this. I don't want any of the other users in here basically trying to fight with me or work on top of the work that I'm currently performing on that asset.
Yeah, I can see the tree. Right now it's locked for me because you're modifying it, and I see the transaction history in the multi-user browser showing all the changes that you're making. Plus in the content browser, I have a lock icon on the tree asset.
Cool. Yeah, and I have the lock icon also showing that it's currently being locked by myself. So I'm just going to kind of move that guy back over and then just unlock it just in case someone else wants to play with the tree.
Yeah, so when you make these changes, again, they're going to show up in the transaction history here in the multi-user browser. Now, normally you wouldn't want to save these changes until you're finished with your collaborative session, till you're all done and everybody's done everything they wanted to do for the day. And then you would do what's called persisting the changes, or if we go to source control here, we can see it's called persist session changes. And so what that's going to do, right now we're actually working in kind of a virtual sandbox. So all these changes we're making are not actually being saved to our local files. And if we want to do that, if we want to persist those changes and save them to our local project files, we need to both go to source control and click on persist session changes. And that's going to bring up a persist and submit files window. You'll want to make sure everything's checked that you want to save. In this case, it's just the map because all we did was move a tree around, and then hit persist.
All right, so I'm looking at this and it looks a little hot to me. I think the exposure is a little hot on some of the stuff. So I'm going to jump in here and just grab a few of these post-process volumes. So let's just search for those guys really quickly, and let's grab this deck one, and I'm going to put that down to minus 0.7. And then the one that I'm currently sitting in is this post-process out. So I'm going to put that down to something like minus 0.6, and you can see that, or even minus 1, just to make it a little bit more extreme.
Oh yeah, I see.
Oops,
those
I went
changes.
the wrong way
That's
there.
a little hot there, bud.
I was looking for a minus 1, but I got a 1. But the point is, we're sitting here, we're working on stuff, and Matt, he obviously didn't like the change I made, so I was able to remedy that really, really quickly.
Yeah, it looks good.
And that's probably a little too
dark. Yeah, I was about to say
minus
it's a little dark.
Minus 0.7.
Cool. Well, that was nice, Daryl. I got to do a little art direction on you there. So what else can we do?
Well, there's lots of things that you can do. Basically, anything that you do inside of the editor, you can do in a multi-editor session. So I'm just going to kind of fly over here, and I want to make some modifications or some changes to this large landscape. And the landscape was actually done using Brushify that I got off of the marketplace. Brushify is really super cool tech. It was actually the recipient of a mega grant. So I'm just going to jump into the landscape tool. So we'll go ahead and we'll highlight this guy, and we'll jump over to our modes landscape. All right, so here we are in the landscape tool. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to my sculpt brush, and I'm just going to crank that radius down a little bit. And Matt, are you checking out what I'm doing here?
Yeah, I'm watching you.
All right, so as I start to sculpt this, do you see any changes?
I do not.
For you to see the changes, this is a key point. Certain things are going to be live, like dropping in assets that already exist or actors that already exist, or translating objects, making changes to the post-process volume, but other things are going to have to actually kind of get a kick or a push to make its way over to you. And this is one of those examples where I have to actually save this asset for it to make it to you. So for Matt to get those changes, all I have to do is basically jump back over to my select mode and just do a save current. And with that done...
It's asking me to save content now. All right, I'll hit save selected. Oh, and there it is. I see the change.
There you go. So pretty awesome. And this is what Brushify does. It's so cool is when I sculpted that up, you can see that it went ahead and on those very steep areas of the slope, it made it turn rocky, and it actually went and placed a few little rocks or pebbles on that, which is pretty awesome.
Cool, Daryl. So, however, why don't you come with me over back to the house, because there's something that was kind of bugging me over here. And I want to actually change this material on the patio here. So in order to do that, I'm going to select it. And then if I look in my details panel, we can see we've got our two materials here. And I want to change this material instance decking. And before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and browse to it in the content browser to get it selected. Now, before I start editing it, I want to make sure that you can't edit it too, and then we have to resolve that conflict. So I can manually lock it. So if I right-click on it and then go to multi-user and choose lock assets, that's now going to manually lock this asset so that nobody else can modify it while I modify it. So now I can come in here inside of the material instance editor and I can make some tweaks here. So maybe I want to change the color tint here. So maybe I want to make it a little bit redder. Maybe not that red. And then I'll hit OK. Now, you probably aren't going to see a change yet. Is that correct?
Nope. No changes on my end.
Great. So I need to actually hit the save button on this asset. So now that I've saved it, you should see the change.
Yeah, as soon as you hit save, it pushed it right to me.
You'll also notice that the lock, if you go to that material in the content browser, the lock that was on it that I manually placed is now gone. Once I hit save, it removes all locks. So Daryl, we've been doing a lot of work individually, right? So like I follow you around, you follow me around, and we watch each other. But let's actually start to collaborate. Let's both work at the same time. And so I have an idea. Why don't we add some grass to this area here? This is kind of a ugly, barren looking area here without any grass on it. And I'll add some plants to the outside wall here to kind of decorate this area a little better.
Over here? Okay, cool. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to use the foliage paint tool to do this. And how are you going to approach adding the grass in on that wall?
So we've got a plant here in the content browser under ground cover CarX, and it's called a CarX plant. So I'm just going to drag it into the scene.
All right, I'm going to jump over to the foliage, and I've got some grasses already set up in here to start painting. So these guys are kind of already toggled on. So let's go ahead and start doing this.
All right, and I'm just going to do some scale work, make this plant a little bigger.
Yeah, make them a little bigger. I'm starting to see him pop up over the wall. Make it a little bit bigger from this view.
A little bigger than that?
I don't really see it. Yeah, make a mega plant. There you go. Good? Big grass. Yeah, they're coming through. So I'm going to start painting my grass now. So I've just started to drop this grass down with a little bit of some flowers in there too.
Well, I'm not actually seeing it. I don't see any grass being
Yeah, so this is similar to basically once I let go of the mouse button, it will push the changes to you. So kind of similar to the other landscape thing that we were doing where, it doesn't push those changes until I, let go of the mouse.
Oh, yeah, I see it now.
As soon as I do that, as soon as I mouse up, you should see that foliage kind of coming in. And of course, I kind of painted on the deck here. So let me just hold down my shift key and pull that back a little bit there. And, that looks pretty good. Yeah.
Cool. So we can actually work together at the same time on different things.
Yeah, more grass. Uh-oh, grass on the deck. Yeah, so that's really the whole point is, we're both in here. We're able to see exactly what the other person's doing. And basically, two minds are better than one a lot of times on some of this stuff. So it's really fun having us both in the same environment.
Fantastic. So Daryl, did you know we can also add cinematics while we're working together like this?
Nice. That sounds useful.
Yeah, so I can actually create a cinematic. I'm not going to do anything groundbreaking because obviously we don't have the time. But I'll drop in a camera and create a cinematic, and we'll set it up so that you can actually see the progress as I work on it. So I'm going to go into the content folder here, the root, and the first thing I want to do is create the sequence. Are you in the content folder as well?
I am at the base of the, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay. So I'm going to right click here, go to animation, and then select level sequence. And I'll call this, oh, I don't know, webinar Cine.
Okay, yeah, no, it just popped into my content browser. I got it.
So in order for this to work, we're going to need a cinematic camera actor. I think we might already have one in the scene. So I'm going to select that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Cine sequence here. Okay, so in the sequencer window here, there are 3 new buttons when we're synced to a session. So this first button here is going to control playback and scrubbing. And as long as every user has this button enabled, each of those users that has it enabled will see the scrubbing and playback. So do you have your sequencer window open?
Yeah, you know what? I opened it as soon as you added it. You put it in front of me and I had to touch it. So
Great. So do you have that button, that first one, enabled?
it is.
So now you should see me scrubbing the timeline.
I do. Yep.
Now, the second button here, this has to do with having multiple sequences and being able to sync those, but we don't have multiple, so we're not going to worry about that one. And then this final button here, this button will automatically open the sequence window, the editing window for all users when I open it. So if you have that button enabled, any users that have that button enabled, it will automatically open that window. And you probably don't always want that, so I generally would recommend leaving this off.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so from here, we just need to create our sequence. So I'll select this Cine Camera Actor. I'll go into my sequence editor, add to sequencer, add that Cine Camera Actor. Did you see that added to your window as well?
Yeah, no, it showed up. It looks like you're over in the trees or something.
Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and pilot that camera and move it to where I want to move it. So let's just have it facing the house here. And then we'll set a transform keyframe on that. And then I'll drag my slider to the end here. We'll move in a little bit, set another keyframe, and there we go.
Nice. So I see it playing back on my timeline in the sequencer. And if I want to see the camera, all I have to do is make that visible in my viewport. So
That's
even
right.
though I see your sequencer, I haven't asked Unreal to pilot that camera in my viewport. So if I click that icon, I've now got the same camera move that you have.
Awesome.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Now that we've had some time to play around with the multi-user editing tools, we can actually use virtual scouting tools as well in this same session. Now, the virtual scouting tools inside of Unreal allow for real-time virtual production tools. And they're going to allow directors and designers to compose shots, to set up scene blocking and lighting, to make marks in the scene, to create notes letting people know about changes that need to be made, as well as being able to make measurements between objects, to interact with objects and move them around, and even to add cameras. And the great thing about the virtual scouting tools in Unreal is that they work very well with the multi-user editing system. Finally, the virtual scouting tools are built on blueprints, making them fully customizable. So let's jump back into Unreal and look at how to set up our virtual scouting system. First, we need to enable the plugin under Settings, Plugins. Then search for Virtual, and you're going to want to enable Virtual Production Utilities. This will require a restart of the engine. Once restarted, we need to go to Project Settings. And in Project Settings, we're going to scroll down towards the bottom. From here, we need to find Virtual Production Editor. Then under Virtual Scouting User Interface, we need to change the drop-down to Virtual Scouting Widget. Next up, we're going to go to our editor preferences. In here, we're going to look under General for VR mode. And under VR mode, we'll scroll down to the Motion Controller section. In here, we need to change the Interactor class to Virtual Scouting Interactor. And the Teleporter class needs to be changed to Virtual Scouting Teleporter. Under World Movement, we want to uncheck Show World Movement Grid and Show World Movement Post Process. From here, we'll go to Level Editor Viewport and scroll down to Grid Snappings, and then uncheck Enable Grid, Rotation, and Scale Snapping. And we're all set. Okay, so now that we've done all the setup to get our VR scouting tools to work, all we really need to do to enter VR scouting mode is click this VR mode button. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And I've got my VR headset on. All right, so I'm going to show you just briefly some of the options available to you in VR Scouting Tools, while Daryl does some Variant Manager stuff in the living room over there. All right, so first of all, if we look at our controls and we bring them close to our face here, you can see these little pop-ups. They'll let you know what the buttons do, and they're context sensitive, so it's based on what option you're currently using in the VR Scouting Tools. So we can see the top button here, that's going to be our main menu. Then we have our touchpad at the top right now, that's our laser. So if I press that, you can see my laser. The bottom one here is going to be for teleporting around, and then the grip button here is for grip navigation. So if I use the grip button here, if I hold that down and then I drag either direction, left or right, or up or down, that's going to move me around in the viewport, kind of like climbing through the view. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and use my teleport here. So I'm going to just hold that down. And if I turn my head left and right, you can see it's rotating where I'm going to be facing when the teleport ends. And I'm going to let go of that button. All right, so now we're going to go into the menu and just briefly look at some of the options available to us here. So I'll pull up my menu. And if you look on the left of the scouting menu, you can see other users that are currently in the scene with us. You can see Daryl here. If I were to click on him with the trigger, then that's going to actually teleport me to his location, but I'm not going to do that now. So I don't have time to cover all of these options available to us in here. We have things like a viewfinder, we can measure, we can drop a dolly, a tripod, and we can even interact with objects and move them around or use a virtual viewfinder. But due to time constraints, we're going to start with adding a marker, and then we'll also add a light using the gaffing tool. You can see that my controller here has turned into kind of a highlight marker. So if I bring that close to my face, you can see we've got our pick color here on the top of our touchpad. We can also use the eraser by using the touchpad. So let's click on pick color, put our finger over that, and then move it around until we get the color we want. And now if I simply hold the trigger and draw in the viewport, you can see that I'm drawing some text. I'm going to write M for Matthew. All right. Let's go ahead and bring our menu back up. And now we'll add some lighting with our gaffer tool. So I'll select that with the trigger. And then in the scene here, I'm going to pull the trigger, and that's going to add the light to that spot, and it's going to point it in that direction. Now, as long as I have my controller close to the light here, if we look at our buttons, we can see that we have the ability to control the brightness as well as the spread of the light. So let's go ahead and increase the spread. So now the cone angle is much greater. You can go ahead and bring that back down to make it tighter. And then I can also increase the brightness here with the top part of the touchpad, or I can bring that brightness back down using the bottom part of the touchpad. Now, you may notice that because I'm behind the light here, it's real hard for me to see what's in front of it. If I bring up my two controls here and I hold both grips, I can actually rotate my view now by moving these two controllers left and right. So now I can actually rotate around this light and see what's in front of it. So obviously that light's a little too bright, so I can bring the brightness down, but I can also increase the spread.
Awesome, Matt. Well, thank you so much for giving us a run through of the multi-user editing functionality inside of Unreal, as well as the virtual scouting toolset. So if you're still interested in collaborative workflows inside of Unreal, make sure to click on the link below to check out the Collab Viewer template presentation that we put together. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Cheers.